there, fantasy owners. Welcome to Lift the Cup Fantasy, or LTC Fantasy as some call it. And we're going to continue with our 2021-2022 team fantasy reviews. And we're going to look at the Chicago Blackhawks today. See who led them in different stats for goaltenders, defensemen, forwards. Who was the biggest fantasy disappointment? Who was the biggest fantasy surprise? And who on their roster was relevant on a weekly basis fantasy-wise? Reviews continue to come out a few times a week because there's really no better way to spend the fantasy offseason than, well, watching some playoffs, some good series going on, and also talk a little bit of fantasy hockey. Don't forget to subscribe. That way you can catch your favorite team's review. Maybe you want to check out your rivals' review, or maybe you want to catch all 32, or maybe just a team that you overlook during the season and you want to see what they have available fantasy-wise and get you prepped for next year. We'll jump right into it. Goalie stats. Who led Chicago? We're excluding Fleury. He'll be included in Minnesota since he left there. So games played was Kevin Lankinen at 32 games played. He also led them in wins at 8, which is ugly, but Fleury was there for a while. Goals against average at 3.5, which is pretty damn high. And save percentage, Colin Delia led them at .899, which is pretty ugly, as it was overall for the season there. It was a rough year in Chicago. Rumor has it that they do want Lankinen to be the starter, so expect him to be the starter next season. Depending what they do in the offseason, might be another long year in Chicago. D-man stats. Goals was some brotherly love there. Caleb and Seth Jones both had 5 goals. Seth led him in assists at 46. Also in points at 51. Plus minus was the other brother, Caleb Jones. He was the best one at -3. Hits was Jake McCabe at 166. Blocks was Kelvin DeHaan at 172. And shots on goal, no surprise, Seth Jones at 194. He logs a ton of minutes for him. Overall, Seth Jones is the guy. McCabe actually had a decent fantasy season, especially in the second half there. Forwards for him, who led them in goals, was Alex De Brunken at 41. Nice 40-goal season for him. Assists, Patrick Kane, no surprise there at 66. And also Patrick Kane in points at 92. Keeps producing. Plus minus was Taylor Radish at +1. Nice trade deadline acquisition for him. Hits was Reese Johnson at 141 hits. And the surprising thing is, he led them in hits at 141, and he only played 37 games this season. So that's some nice banging bodies around in a short period of time. Blocks was Kirby Dock at 44. And shots on goal was Patrick Kane at 287. A little bit of a... Normally you see the guy that leads in goals, leads in shots, but it was Kane, not De Brunken, that led him in shots. Obviously, Kanan De Brunken had some good seasons. Dylan Strome also had a really nice second half fantasy-wise, so it might be somebody to consider late rounds next year, or definitely streaming. Biggest disappointment for me was Kirby Dock. He had a really rough season. 9 goals, 17 assists for 26 points in 70 games played. He's a 3rd overall pick a few years ago. Definitely was hoping that he'd trend in an upward direction, and we really didn't see that fantasy-wise this year. Biggest surprise, it's kind of tough with the season that Chicago had. You knew De Brunken, Kane, and Seth Jones were going to produce. If I had to pick somebody, I'd pick Jake McCabe. He had a really decent second half there. He had 22 points in 75 games played. 12 of those points were in the final 25 games of the season. He also led the team in hits at 166, and he had 167 blocks. Fantasy relevant on the weekly basis, really there's 3. There's Seth Jones, Alex De Brunken, and Patrick Kane. They're going to carry the load for you fantasy-wise. Depending on strength of schedule, you could stream somebody, obviously, like McCabe, Dylan Strome. If Doc gets his poop in a group, there'd be somebody else there too, depending what they bring up next year. Reichel's a nice young prospect, depending how he pans out. Good year in the minors. Other than that, you're a little limited in Chicago. Going to be a few long seasons there. We'll be out in a little bit with our next fantasy review. If you did like it, don't forget to press like, hit subscribe, and remember that notification bell. And enjoy the playoffs and fantasy offseason, owners.